wants a chair, put a hand up, we can send it there. Bill Bendig definitely.
There you go, Bill.
Would like to be.
We got one right here for you, Bill. This is yours.
Would you like a chair? There's some right around there. There aren't a lot. There are more people than chairs. Yes, I have that.
Good. Have a seat.
We can have everybody's attention.
As noted, my name is Bugs Bear, and I'm not the lead trustee. I'm merely alphabetically the first trustee. Bill left his estate to a foundation that he created, and the 4 trustees are myself, Marv Beloff. Marv, somebody doesn't know you, I'll bet. Put your hand up. Alan Bisbort,
Right here.
who is over here, and Jonas Ruta, right here. And each of them will have some words to say. I probably knew Bill the least of most of the people here. I didn't meet him until about 8 or 9 years ago. So I'm virtually a newcomer to this group. Also, Johnny Moscow has words to say, and Sandy Swan.
And Bob Miller.
And Bob Miller. Fine. We'd like to ask each speaker to limit it to 2, 2.5, 3 minutes, so that we're not here through darkness, and that we all have time to look at the works. So with that, I'll turn this over next to Marv Buell.
Bill was my friend, and we met in 1963, and I was learning to be a sculptor at that time, a weekend sculptor, and Bill was very friendly and a mentor. He was also involved with the John Slade Ely House at that time as curator, and the John Slade Ely House had been available for an art show in New Haven on Trumbull Street. But when Bill took over, it was almost every 2 or 4 weeks there would be a new show, and it really was quite something to the art world in New Haven, how important Bill had made that be. In 1965, there were events that occurred that made him turn his back on all of us, and he came out to this house. He locked his door, he played his piano, because he had studied with Paul Hindemith at Yale, piano, and then became a sculptor, which obviously he preferred. And he spent 30 years here, isolated and alone, making these remarkable sculptures that you see. We reunited in 1994 when he appeared on a TV show that I had called Marv's Mike on Cox Cable. I called him and I got him to open his door and let me come in, and we became very good friends. We helped one another both artistically, and because he certainly was a mentor to me, and we helped each other age-wise, because as we both were growing older, we had some health problems. I believe he is one of the greatest wood sculptors and have been amazed at the work he created throughout his life. He was a prolific writer of letters describing his simple philosophy of life and his frustration with the art world that rejected him. I was lucky enough to be one of the few recipients of those letters. They are remarkable and so revealing. He was a very bright man, a wonderful pianist, for me a dear friend and a gifted sculptor and mentor and I will miss him. Alan?
Alan?
Maybe I should come out here. Are you filming this?
Yeah.
Okay. Get out here in front of the camera.
Oh, okay.
I met Bill Kent in 1999 when I was writing an article for Connecticut Magazine on Connecticut masters. The idea of the article was to find 5 masters, because 5 is a nice number for a magazine, and to write profiles of each of them in the state, from the state. And of course, I was introduced to Bill's work by Marv Beloff, like many people probably here have been introduced to Bill's work because of Marv, and who's been his greatest champion, I think. And so, but once I was brought here, and Marv brought me in here and introduced me to Bill, and I walked in, I realized that Bill was in a league of his own. It was not even close to these other people I would be writing profiles about. And so I practically begged the editor to, let me write a separate thing on Bill Kent. It was diminishing to Bill to be next to these others, not that that diminishes them. I'm just saying that this is a master, And so the experience I had, maybe some of you had this today, of walking in that door for the first time. You simply can't walk into this barn for the first time and not be overwhelmed by the presence of artistic mastery on so many fronts. And so over the next 13 years, I guess it was, yeah, I would write about Bill many times for many different venues. And sometimes I would just make up reasons to write about him and then try to, con the editors into letting me write about him. And even sometimes I wrote a weekly column for the Advocate newspapers. I would, with Bill's permission, use one of his slate prints to illustrate my column. And every time I was keeping this, what I considered the smallest little portal to the outside world open, for him. It was never a case of, oh, this poor suffering artist in this, barn. It was, and he hated that, by the way. He hated that whole poor old man, curmudgeon, recluse thing, that perception of him. And it's been so enlightening today to meet some people that knew Bill when he was this vibrant, part of this very vibrant New Haven area art circle, where he was anything but that perception of him. But anyway, he hated that perception because he once told me that implied the work I'm doing Bill's voice was not good enough to sell, probably not commercially viable in the first place, because everyone knows if an artist is good, he sells. But none of that ultimately mattered to Bill, because in addition to being the greatest artist I've ever had the privilege to befriend, he was the most self-contained human being I've ever met. He wasn't plagued or paralyzed by self-doubts, at least artistically. So he didn't allow it to slow down his production. He knew he was a great artist, and he was locked into his own very idiosyncratic vision. So, he could have allowed this bitterness, which we all have seen, to fester and stop him, and he certainly, if you ever asked him about it, he would unload on you about this. But it didn't. He had other bigger things to fry, bigger fish to fry or carve. He had his vision, and he never wavered from it. He maintaining the same regimen every day, getting up at the crack of dawn or before, in that little house, coming down into the studio. He would go right to this spot, right here where we're standing. This was his main workspace. He would pick up where he left off the day before. He knew exactly what he was working on. He had sketches set up as we have all this around here to show you. This is exactly how the studio was when he died. Then when he would do his 2 or 3 or 4 hours of hard labor, he would break for lunch, have a light lunch, and then play piano. I recall visiting him once and not wanting to interrupt him while he was playing, and just standing at that door out there. waiting for him to finish, and then I knocked on the door. But it was beautiful. He was playing Chopin, and you know, you could hear it down the road here, all the way around the corner. He once, as he once told me, his philosophy was, you do your art and then you die. That's the way the world wants it. It was a statement, pure and simple, without an ounce of self-pity in it. And it's not that he was a recluse, although he undeniably he preferred his company to anyone else's. But that's too pat of an explanation for the neglect that greeted the world's greatest carver of wood. He just, I think mostly he just didn't want to spend 1 minute doing something other than working on or thinking about his art. And so he was an inspiration and a loyal friend to me personally, and will always continue to be. And I'm honored to be on the board of his commission.
Jonas.
Well, I'd like to add, I think that Alan gave a very nice understanding of Bill's work, and my experience with him came much later, I think around 1998, 99. And Alan contacted me. I'm the art director. At the time, I was the art director of the York Square Cinema in New Haven, and asked me if I would be interested in seeing Bill's work at his studio, and I said yes, from what I understand. So I came here, and that day was quite remarkable because it was a cloudy day like today, and walking around, I heard a piano playing, and I thought, well, that's wonderful music. It sounds like very familiar. And it turned out it was, I listened, I said, well, that's Beethoven, but it's not. It's a symphony, and it was the 7th Symphony that he had transcribed. He was playing on the piano, and it was just so sublime, so beautiful to hear. And then I came into his studio and saw, I waited outside until he finished playing, until I heard him stop playing, and then knocked on the door. So like Alan came in and just was bowled over by the array and the power of the scale of his work. And so we discussed his ideas, his theories about art, his political points of view, which I found very, very positive, but from his point of view, but in his expression of them, he had really suffered at the hands of the society of the '60s, especially, and the remnants of that, of that period of the '50s, of McCarthyism and HUAC. So you can see those examples in his work. The political statements are very strong. His technical expressions are really extraordinary. To show the prints that he made on rice paper and fabrics that were taken, that were printed from carved slate blackboards, and you can see in this room the actual slates that are there to get an idea. These are not paintings, but these are actual prints made from slate pressings, and that were done with, not with a roller, but with a hand roller. And his political statements were very expressive of his point of view at that time, of his situation, what caused him to become recluse in Connecticut. Very unfortunate. But it was very important for me to, when I saw his work, I was immediately, this is so beautiful and amazing. The scale of his sculpture work is so profound and so unique in modern sculpture. He had to deal with people telling him that no one's doing that kind of work anymore, no one cares about that. And that's what he told me, that galleries were not interested in showing work, large wood carvings that were polyurethane covering the whimsical ideas of corkscrews and faucets and Disney characters. So, but I was very happy to show his work. I was at the York Square Cinema Gallery in New Haven at the time, in September '60, and we had some very good press coverage. Alan was one of the contributors to that with the New York Times, and so there was a great explosion of interest in his work that really was a great benefit to reintroduce Bill into the art scene. So I'm very pleased and very proud to have been part of that period. Also, I kept my friendship with him and came to visit him, and he was invited to Wendy Gell's studio on Lake Quantapug, where he liked to visit, and lent her one of his Peapod sculptures for many years, and it was very, I had a good friendship with him. I saw him the day of the 2008 election, just to hear his perspectives at that time on history, which were very profound. Not just political, but his historical understanding of the world was brilliant. It was brilliant, and his classical references in his work are really to be looked at and try to get the references that he's developing, having to do with Greek mythology and ancient architectural forms. He works with the forms as well as the figure, and this was a cause of difficulty in his acceptance in the art world for many years, but he's back, so we miss him very much, and it was really very sad to lose him this year. I'm really very pleased with the work that Joan and Bugs have done to keep with him.
Bob,
Thank you. So, take a look at the symbolism in his work is really fascinating, to say the least. So it really deserves to be looked at.
Thank you everyone for coming. But, I'm actually a neighbor and a friend of Bill's. I'm not really involved in the artwork in any way, but I did put together a couple words just to say about Bill. Thank you for coming today. I'm the proudest man in this room. I first met Bill as an 8-year-old child. The first piece of art I remember is the 1/2 squid head with 1/2 natural log. It amazed me how carved wood and art became one. Bill purchased this property from my grandfather, Ben Miller, in 1964. The story had it, it was a handwritten agreement, paid in cash. I think the final registration with the town of Durham was about 1975. What a great sale. Little did a Lithuanian immigrant farmer know that a ramshackle dwelling would turn into an American icon. I have had the privilege to visit this mecca of art whenever I wanted to. As a single guy, I never realized how Bill's art would influence my future. Not only was it my threshold, it became my family's as well. Alicia, Josh, and Justin all became believers. What a special man, or what? Does anyone else do this stuff, I was asked? I don't know was the answer. Well, the answer, as you can all see today, is no. Bill was unmatched in his genre, both physically and mentally, a true genius. When our sons were young, on summer afternoons, we'd walk down to Bill's shop and listen from the yard. Opera playing in the background, and Bill carving his sculptures. Chop, 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 and then a pause, always with the opera playing in the background. Chop, 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 never knowing when the chopping would start or stop. Opera, summer heat, chop, chop, chop. It was our own little corner of the world. My family, Mike, John, and Wendy Civitello, and Bill. He continued to carve wood until his last days, with each piece being just as good as the last or better. There was no drop-off in his carving skills when it came to art. He called it wheelchair art, mocking himself. Life brings challenges, and Bill answered every one of them. Every once in a while, Josh or Justin would ask, "How is Bill doing?" The answer was always good and still working, even though he endured some extremely difficult times. Later in life, he became a courageous figure to all of us, a man amongst men, with no axe to grind, one who would carve his own path amongst all odds. No one had anything on Bill Williamson. Alicia and I are the proud owners of 14 William Kent pieces. We are also the benefactor of having Bill in our lives. From Josh and Justin's first job, mowing his lawn or shoveling his snow for Bill, or just having a cup of coffee and talking politics. He was a true neighbor, an unknown pillar of the Durham community. I couldn't have asked for a better neighbor. He challenged our minds, he challenged the world, he cared for us. He raised the bar to a new level that none of us could possibly understand. May his history be carved into the walls of this humble dwelling. May mankind enjoy his art for thousands of years to come. Thank you very much.
That's wonderful.
That was great.
I'd like to juggle the lineup slightly. Peter Falk, who has been his art agent, has promised his presence back among his children as soon as possible. So I'd like to call on Peter to speak for just a moment.
Thanks, Bugs. No, I have just very brief thing. That was really wonderful.
Thank you very much, Peter.
I wish I'd met you earlier.
Yeah.
No, that was really great. Sort of dispelling this myth of Bill being the old curmudgeon as Alan was referring to. I just wanted to say really briefly the mission, and I didn't hear the beginning of your thing, so I'm not sure, the William Kent Foundation. So where do we go from here? He's a great guy, one of America's most important sculptors ever. And so where do we go with, here's an artist who, who would have known, hidden right in front of us all this time. The mission of the William Kent Foundation, you hope I speak out of line, is twofold. Number one, to in fact gain greater recognition, long overdue, for Bill Kent. To do that in the form of having a book published concurrently with a museum exhibition, hopefully one that we can travel. Hopefully I can get museums interested in this. This is the big, task before us. Then, with that added recognition comes enhancement of the value of the works, because what this is leading to is what Bill's own wishes were. And he called himself an indigent artist. And he wanted to help other indigent artists over age of 60 who were steadfast, working as he was, dedicated to his work. All the money that comes from the sale of these works, and that's part 2 of this, is getting a major gallery or galleries in major cities around the country to have shows, represent them, sell the work, and get the money in the hands of artists, which is directly Bill's wishes. Have I got that right, Bugs?
You got to go right.
Okay. So it's 2 things. Gaining him that recognition. I'm in the process of writing a biography on him right now. We have already have 2 great articles, one by Alan Bisbort and by his wife. They're on rediscoveredmasters.com. This is where the biography will appear. And Rediscovered Masters is serving as a sort of a catalog for Bill's works, and for so that I can tell museum curators, well, go to this site and here's the show that we propose, So that's what we've already got started, so you can go to rediscoveredmasters.com and check that out. And hopefully we'll have some great success. But what I was really surprised, and I'm sorry, I forgot your name. You brought an article in.
Oh, Ellen.
Ellen brought an article in from the New York Times from 98 or 99?
98.
98. And it's a great article, full page. Who gets a full page article in the New York Times? Really hard. But the thing that really shocks me, because I've been doing this for 35 years, rediscovering forgotten American artists. That's what I do. And bringing them back and saying, look what you've missed all this time. That's where the satisfaction comes. But the thing that shocked me is that article didn't result in some gallery anywhere in the country coming here and picking up and saying, we want to represent you. Totally shocks me. I don't know, maybe the work is a little too idiosyncratic. He hated being labeled as a pop artist, and he certainly hated being labeled as an outsider artist. Bill was kind of inside out, He was idiosyncratic in his own way, but I think that in fact is his strength, and that's what we're going to really be promoting, and no one deserves it more. So I hope we succeed. We don't let him down. That's what we promised him I would do. So better come through. So thank you all for coming.
Now, I see Leo Jensen standing here,
I have nothing to say.
and you heard his own words. He has nothing to say, but won't you say a few words?
I have nothing to say.
All right. Leo is if not Leo.
I know Bill since 19, I think it was 51, 50 or 51. We were very close friends for many years. I haven't seen him for a long time now. We had some contact by telephone, but everything has been said in his work. There's nothing else to say.
Thank you.
That's it.
Johnny Mosca is also here, who probably qualifies as an equally old friend.
We have lost William Kent, and those among us who knew him also as Williamson, the name he had renounced, or, as he delightedly elaborated to the curious, he had flung back to his father's face for having failed to consult with him at his conception. We mourn him and feel his loss in a special measure. The transition from Williamson to Kent, turning a vocation into necessity, becoming William Kent, entailed abandoning Paul Hindemith's wandering ship at Yale Music and throwing Euterpe under the bus. It had enough of the muse. It had enough of all the muses, those fickle prompters and custodians of enactment, of spectacles, performance, recitation, enunciation. This art would steer clear of their enclave. There would be no singing or dancing or gnashing of teeth in his work. It was at first, this parting of the ways, an ordeal that resembled doing penance. Penance for a betrayal of purpose, payback from a jilted principle. It was a season that, with its full freight of cuts, bruises, and hematomas that accompanied the trials of mastering a new craft, brought forth as well the apprentice's anxieties of self-revelation, but also a season that came with alternations of joyfulness and repose, the fire and cool of invention. In time, with his creations accruing as an unbroken train of thought, and as his work found weight and range, the sense of his own limitation abated. Aspirations were reined in and compressed into operating principles. He needed only a few of them to seek mass and symbol as one entity in wood and stone specificity, to remain corporeal and earthbound in all projections and inclines, to gouge, chip, rasp, and excavate until the elemental archetype is unveiled and the pillar of salt is set free. These were the steely tenets of his art, the wind behind his sails. Body and image as fusion. Brancusi unchained from the hacked-out, clumsy physiognomy of the painted cigar store Indian, his forerunner. Neil Welliver, the painter, said, "When I go into a wood searching for a subject to paint, whatever scrap of landscape my eyes happen to fall upon, I try to locate its center of power and then proceed to paint that. It's imagined, not through representation, which the camera would do better. The Romans looked for the spirit of the thing, spiritus loci, probably meaning the same thing, though center of power cuts a wider swath in our power-obsessed age. What about William Kent? He chiseled, he gouged, he hacked away, and polished his blocks until he found the likeness of the primordial instrument of classical symbology, or the biblical pillar of salt, in which he sought his own apotheosis. But we are here to remember him, not to discuss his art. He took more than a passing interest in literary concepts, especially theories of poetry, which he appropriated and applied to his own work. Concepts such as the Coleridgean emotion recollected in tranquility, Archibald MacLeish, a poem must not mean, but simply be. Marianne Moore's a poem is a real toad in an artificial garden. Notions that we, with Bill Scarton coming up from New York, we often argued and parsed with whooping merriment. Now here we are, to find ourselves besieged, teased, prodded by these marvels of posture and make-believe, these embodiments of object and metaphor. And I remember with a catch those other pieces, desolate and forlorn as they seemed, from his first studio in the cavernous basement of a stately home on Prospect Street in New Haven, where he had found lodgings in exchange for menial caretaking chores, such as putting out the trash, servicing the lawn, snow removal, and so on.